I'm John, your YouTube English teacher. In this lesson, we're going to read two different but very similar articles about Donald Trump. The first version will be about the intermediate level, and the second version will be much more advanced. At the end, we're going to compare and examine both versions so you can see the differences. At the end of the lesson, I'm going to reread both versions at a natural speed so you can practice, understand, and focus on my pronunciation. You can also repeat the article with me. If you want to follow and study, I created a free PDF that's on my website. Just go to the description and click the link. It's right there. You can also navigate using the times on YouTube. One more thing. I also have a challenge for you. What is this article about? What did we read? Can you summarize the details? Try it in the comment section. Now, let's go. The name of this article is Donald Trump's Hush Money Trial. During this lesson, generally, the color red will represent events and grammar, and the color blue will represent vocabulary. Let's start. Donald Trump's Hush Money Trial, Level 1. Former President Donald Trump was found guilty of 34 felony counts by a jury in New York. These charges were related to falsifying business records to cover up payments made to keep quiet about his alleged past affair before the 2016 presidential election. The trial, which lasted several weeks, has now ended, but Trump is expected to appeal the decision. Hush is a word in English that means be quiet. It means shh, don't talk. So, when we combine hush with money, we create hush money, which means don't tell anyone about this money. We need to hide it. A trial is when we go through the legal system, the justice system. We have a judge and a jury in a courtroom. Former President Donald Trump was found guilty of 34 felony counts by a jury. This, in English, is called the passive voice, and it's something we see very often when we read news articles. There are two ways of expressing this idea. We can say that the jury found Donald Trump guilty, or we can say Donald Trump was found guilty by the jury. It's the same idea, just two different structures. Guilty is a word that means the opposite of innocent. So, Donald Trump is guilty. Donald Trump is not innocent, according to this jury. When we say 34 felony counts, we're talking about 34 separate crimes. And the word felony tells us that these crimes are considered very serious. A felony is a very serious crime. When we say these charges, we're talking about those 34 felony counts, and they were related to falsifying business records. When we say related, we should use the preposition to. They go together. Related to something. In this case, related to falsifying business records. And to falsify something means to make it not true, to make it false. And we often see this word in crime. So they were related to falsifying business records. Why? For what reason? To cover up. This is a phrasal verb. And to cover up just means to hide something, to cover something completely. Hide it so they don't see it or find it. And to cover up payments made. We make payments. We don't do payments. We make them. This is a typical collocation. So, falsifying business records to cover up payments made to keep quiet. This again answers for what reason? To keep quiet. Keep in this situation means remain or stay quiet, to be quiet about his alleged past affair before the 2016 presidential election. Alleged is a word that means they said this. So this is what they want to prove in court, in front of the judge. It was alleged that he had an affair, which means he wasn't loyal to his wife. He had another relationship with another woman. And this was before the 2016 presidential election. This is a year, and the pronunciation is 2016 or 2016. But 20 is not always the case with years. For example, 2000 is just 2000. We can't use 20. And that's the case for 2001, 2002, 2003, and all the way up to 2009. We must use 2000 for those years. 20 starts at 2010. 2010, 2011, 2012, 2020, 2021, and this year is 2024 or 2024. But 2024 is more common. But we have both options in those situations. So the trial, which lasted several weeks, has now ended. And lasted, or to last, is a verb which talks about duration. So the duration of the trial was several weeks. And it has now ended. We can also say it ended. We can use the past, but this is the present perfect. And the present perfect is more common when you're reading news articles because it sounds a little more formal. This isn't a rule, just something that's more common. But Trump is expected to appeal the decision. Expected by other people. Expected by the public. Expected by the media. And the word expect is a verb in English. And in some languages, this translates to hope or wait, but that's not the case in English. To expect means that you think something is coming in the future. You anticipate it. So we can say the public or the people or the media is expecting Trump to appeal the decision. And appeal is another word that's common in the legal system, which means challenge. He doesn't think it's right, so he's going to get a second opinion from other judges. He's going to challenge or appeal the decision. The conviction means Trump could face prison or probation. He remains free until his sentencing, scheduled for July 11th. Despite his conviction, Trump can still run for president, as being a convicted felon does not prevent someone from campaigning or even winning the presidency in the U.S. The conviction is a word that means the decision that Trump is guilty, that Trump is not innocent. And it means Trump could face prison or probation. And to face is a verb that we often use when someone is punished. And that's the result of their crimes. So Trump could, it's possible, face prison. Or he could face probation. Probation is a word, again, in the justice system, which means that someone is supervising you. Someone is in charge of you, and you have to show good behavior. You can't act in a bad way. This person has to watch you to make sure you're doing things right. He remains or he stays free until his sentencing. And in the legal system, to sentence someone means to give them their final punishment, the final result of their crime, and it's given by the judge. It's also scheduled by the judge. Scheduled, again in the passive voice, represents the verb to schedule something. A schedule is similar to an agenda or a calendar, and we can make this a verb. And it's scheduled for July 11th. 11th. We don't have to write that, but we do have to pronounce that correctly in American English. Remember, month first and the day second. July 11th. And despite his conviction, Trump can still run for president. The word despite shows contrasting ideas, two ideas that are opposite or contrary. Despite his conviction, on one hand, Trump can still run for president. So his conviction isn't important in this situation. And Trump can still run for president. Here we have the modal verb can, and we have the normal verb run. And because we have these two verbs, we put the word still in the middle. And words that are similar to still are called adverbs, such as always or sometimes, only. For example, Trump can always run for president. Trump can sometimes run for president. Trump can never run for president. Trump can only run for president. Trump can still run for president despite his conviction, as or because being a convicted felon doesn't prevent someone from campaigning. So here we have the word as, which is a preposition. It's very similar to because, but it's very formal, which we would use in this article. And after prepositions, we should use the ing form. So, as being a convicted felon doesn't prevent someone from another preposition, campaigning, or even winning the presidency in the U.S. And if you run for something, it means you campaign for something, which means you want to advertise and promote yourself as a candidate for an office, a political office. In this case, the presidency. Last election, the two candidates who were running for president were Joe Biden and Trump. So we have a repeat. Both are still running for president. Interestingly, Trump's right to vote depends on whether he serves time in prison and if he completes his sentence by the election date in Florida, where he's registered to vote. The outcome and the appeals process will keep the case in the public eye for some time. So let's start with Trump's right to do what? To vote. A right is very similar to a permit from the government. It's your right to vote if you're a citizen of the United States. And it depends on. On is the preposition that goes with depend. Many English learners want to say depend of, but we can't say that in English. It depends on whether, or if, he serves time in prison. And usually when we talk about prison, we serve time. And if he completes his sentence by the election date. The word by is a time word, which I like to think of as before or at the moment of the election date. So if he completes his sentence before or at the time of the election date in Florida, where he is registered to vote. The outcome or the result and the appeals process. Remember, appeal means challenge. So the appeals process will keep the case in the public eye for some time. And in the public eye is a great expression, which just means it's visible to the public and getting a lot of attention. And congratulations, you finished level 1. Now let's look at level 2. Level 2 will be more advanced. Let's go. Donald Trump's hush money trial. Level 2. Former President Donald Trump was convicted on 34 counts of falsifying business records, marking the end of his high-profile trial, but also setting the stage for an impending appeal. The jury's decision places Trump in the unique position of being the first former U.S. president convicted of a felony, pending his sentencing on July 11th. So again, former President Donald Trump was convicted by a jury on 34 counts of falsifying business records, marking the end of his high-profile trial, but also setting the stage for an impending appeal. Marking the end is just a good way to say we mark the end of something, the final moment of his high-profile trial. Well, everyone was paying attention to this trial. Donald Trump is very famous, so we use the adjective high profile. It's very important. But also setting the stage. Well, the stage is the area in a theater where actors do their thing. It's where actors act and perform the show. And the word set is often the same as prepare. So this idiom means preparing. We're preparing everything on the stage, on the political stage, on the criminal stage, for an impending appeal. We already learned the word appeal, and that means challenge. But the word impending isn't so common. The word impending suggests that something is going to happen. It's very significant and it's very important. The jury's decision places or puts Trump in the unique position of being. Again, we see a preposition plus ing. The decision places Trump in the position of being the first former U.S. president convicted by a jury of a felony. We learned the word felony before. It's a very serious crime. Pending or waiting for his sentencing on July 11th. Trump, known for his aggressive legal strategies, is likely to challenge the verdict. Although he faces potential imprisonment or probation, his ability to run for the office of the presidency remains unaffected due to the constitutional requirements, which do not rule out felons from seeking or holding the highest office in the land. If someone is known for something, they're famous for something. And Trump is famous for or known for his aggressive legal strategies. And he's likely, which means it's probable, to challenge the verdict. The verdict means the decision of the court, the decision of the jury. Although is another word that shows contrast in English, very similar to despite. So although he faces imprisonment or time in prison, potential imprisonment, which just means possible. So although he faces possible time in prison or probation, his ability to run for the office of the presidency remains unaffected due to, which is very similar to because of, the constitutional requirements, which do not rule out felons. The phrasal verb rule out means eliminate. The constitutional requirements don't eliminate felons, who are people that committed felonies, very serious crimes. The requirements don't rule out or eliminate felons from seeking, another word for searching, or holding the highest office in the land. Well, as an American, we all know that the highest office in the land means the presidency. And when a president is in office, or is the president, he holds that office. So the constitutional requirements don't eliminate serious criminals from searching or being president. Just one more thing before we finish this paragraph. We have the office of the presidency, and we have the highest office in the land. It's the same thing. We're just talking about the president's office. And it's very common in English to not repeat the same phrase. So it's a very good skill to reorganize your words to sound better and more professional in English. In terms of voting rights, as a resident of Florida, Trump's eligibility to vote in the upcoming elections hinges on the completion of any prison term imposed, reflecting the complexities of cross-state voting laws. Whether the outcome of this case sways voters' opinions or not is yet to be seen. In terms of means this is the subject we're focusing on. This is the subject we're talking about. So, in terms of voting rights, that subject, as a resident of Florida, Trump's eligibility or formal ability to vote in the upcoming elections. Upcoming is kind of a phrasal noun. And we have the verb form, which is coming up or to come up, which just means to come in the future, probably the near future. So the upcoming elections tells us that the elections are coming up. They're coming soon. They're coming in the future. So his eligibility to vote in the elections that are coming up hinges on, or depends on, the completion of any prison term imposed by the judge and the jury. Imposed means given to, usually with a little bit of force. So the judge will impose a prison term, maybe, on Donald Trump. He will give him that prison term. So again, Trump's ability to vote in the elections that are coming depends on the completion of any prison term given to him by the judge, reflecting the complexities or the complex ideas and complex things of cross-state voting laws. And this is something maybe unique to the United States, which means our laws are different in different states. Whether or if the outcome, the result, of this case sways voters' opinions or not is yet to be seen. If you sway voters' opinions, you move their opinions by convincing them. So most people in the United States know who they're going to vote for. The candidates will win the election depending on if they can sway or convince voters, if they can change or move their opinions. Another thing here, we have the word whether. And this is the same pronunciation as normal weather, like when it rains or snows or the sun shines. Weather. But this word means if. And an interesting and very common expression in English is whether or not. So this is like saying maybe yes or maybe no, or it doesn't matter. So whether the outcome of this case sways voters' opinions or not is yet to be seen. I'm marking this as grammar, but it's really just an expression, and it's just a very formal way to say that this has not been seen yet. This is a very common writing technique. Remember to change our words that we use, to reorganize them. So this exercise shows us that we can reorganize our words to sound more formal when we read news articles or when we write them. Congratulations again! You just passed level 2. It was much more difficult than level 1. Now I'm going to read the complete versions of level 1 and level 2 to help you process this information in 2 different forms. Then we're going to compare them. So let's go. Level 1. Former President Donald Trump was found guilty of 34 felony counts by a jury in New York. These charges were related to falsifying business records to cover up payments made to keep quiet about his alleged past affair before the 2016 presidential election. The trial, which lasted several weeks, has now ended, but Trump is expected to appeal the decision. The conviction means Trump could face prison or probation. He remains free until his sentencing, scheduled for July 11th. Despite his conviction, Trump can still run for president, as being a convicted felon doesn't prevent someone from campaigning or even winning the presidency in the U.S. Interestingly, Trump's right to vote depends on whether he serves time in prison and if he completes his sentence by the election date in Florida, where he's registered to vote. The outcome and the appeals process will keep the case in the public eye for some time. Level 2. Former President Donald Trump was convicted on 34 counts of falsifying business records, marking the end of his high-profile trial, but also setting the stage for an impending appeal. The jury's decision places Trump in the unique position of being the first former U.S. president convicted of a felony, pending his sentencing on July 11th. Trump, known for his aggressive legal strategies, is likely to challenge the verdict. Although he faces potential imprisonment or probation, his ability to run for the office of the presidency remains unaffected due to the constitutional requirements, which don't rule out felons from seeking or holding the highest office in the land. In terms of voting rights, as a resident of Florida, Trump's eligibility to vote in the upcoming elections hinges on the completion of any prison term imposed, reflecting the complexities of cross-state voting laws. Whether the outcome of this case sways voters' opinions or not is yet to be seen. And finally, we're going to compare both versions. In the first version, former President Donald Trump was found guilty of 34 felony counts. In the second version, former President Donald Trump was convicted on 34 counts. In the first version, these charges were related to falsifying business records, And in the second version, falsifying business records is connected to our first sentence. In our first version, these charges were to cover up payments made to keep quiet about his alleged past affair before the 2016 presidential election. But in the second version, we see all of this information in his high-profile trial. In our first version, we see the trial, which lasted several weeks, has now ended. But in the second version, this comes before some details, and it says, marking the end. In our first version, Trump is expected to appeal the decision. But in our second version, it's setting the stage for an impending appeal. Then, in our second version, we have a lot of extra information about the jury and the first former U.S. president convicted of a felony. In our first version, it says the conviction means Trump could face prison or probation. But in our second version, that information is in the middle of the paragraph. And in our first version, it says he remains free until his sentencing, scheduled for July 11th. But that information is at the end of the first paragraph in our second version. In our first version, it says, despite his conviction, Trump can still run for president. And in our second version, that's in a different place. It talks about his ability to run for the office of the president, and it says it remains unaffected. In our first version, the reason for this is expressed with as being a convicted felon doesn't prevent someone from campaigning or being the president. But in our second version, this is expressed with the expression due to the constitutional requirements, which don't rule out or eliminate felons from seeking or holding the highest office in the land. In our first version, it talks about Trump's right to vote. But in the second version, that changes to Trump's eligibility to vote. In our first version, that depends on whether he serves time in prison. And in our second version, it's not depends on, but it hinges on the completion of any prison term imposed. And finally, in our first version, it shows where he is registered to vote, Florida. But in our second version, that information is in a different place, as a resident of Florida. And remember, I left a free PDF on my website with some notes from this lesson. I hope you downloaded it, and I hope you used it during this lesson. I found these articles very interesting because I noticed the word order changes. It's a very common writing technique to change word order while writing in English. And it's also useful for vocabulary if you want to express yourself in different ways. So I hope you learned something new. Please like, share, and subscribe, and see you in the next lesson.